Hello my friends, I am back with a video about altering a 12 by 12 canvas album cover. This project has been brought to you by the craftshack.com Designer Challenge, Designer Call. This is their first call and I'll include all the links in the bottom of the video. So I'm starting out with a raw canvas album and some magicals. The first magical I'm using is a flat magical called Caribbean Blue by Lindy and it's from the set of called Caribbean Cruise. And the second powder that I'm adding on there is called Queen of Hearts Red. It's also a flat magical from the Mad Hatter collection. And all I did was I took a dry brush and spattered it on there as if I was using a wet material, and then I activated it with spraying water. And I'm spraying water with Mini Misters by Ranger. I end up putting about 3 Mini Misters worth of water onto this, and so it took me quite a while to get it to dry. These magicals are so magical. That's the only way I can say it. They spread and they activated all the color in there. And each pigment or each color is made up of a bunch of pigments. So I'm not just getting reds and blues in there. I'm getting yellows. I'm getting oranges. I'm getting purples. I'm getting all kinds of fabulous colors, and it's looking like sprinkles and fireworks, and it's just so incredibly fabulous. Here's a close-up. You can see I've got purples and yellows and oranges in there. And it's just wonderful. The next step to this process is grabbing a neutral color, and so I grabbed onto Seagrass Green, which is from the Nantucket Pearls collection. Once again, it's a magical, but this one is not flat. It's just a regular magical. So it is going to have pearly accents. Excuse me. It's going to have glimmery accents. It's just going to be an all-round fabulous. You're not going to be able to see that when I get it on the background, and the reason for that is simply because I'm using a raw canvas and it's just going to suck all of the moisture out of this one by the time that I'm done. I'm also using a matte texture paste, and this one is Studio 490 by Wendy, and it's called Embossing Paste. This embossing paste comes out as a foam kind of texture. It's going to be able to flex, and it's going to be able to move, and it's going to be able to, I'm going to be able to stack things on top of this binder, and that texture paste isn't going to go anywhere. And the reason for that is because it is like a sponge. So it compresses and pops right back up. Always clean your tools, of course. And so what I'm doing is I'm mixing this with a paintbrush. And the reason I'm using a paintbrush is because I did add a powder in there, and I want it to become a homogeneous mixture. So I'm going to add all of that in there and use a brush, and then I'm going to grab my stencil. This stencil is a Prima stencil called Rattan, and it's a 12 by 12 stencil, and I think that you can buy this in the craftshack.com store. If not, I am sure that she will find something that you do love in her store. I know I do all the time. All the time. So I am applying this with a brush, and it's just a brush that I use to mix it up with. And the reason that I'm using a brush rather than a hard object is because I wanted it to have a keep the foamy texture to it. I wanted the edges, wherever there was an edge, I wanted it to be raised. Wherever there was a valley, like a gap in it, I wanted there to be a valley. So I did want this extra level of texture. If I could get it, I wanted it. And because this embossing paste is an acrylic base, what it's going to do is it's going to pull, and it's a wet medium, it's going to pull some of the pigment up into it, which is going to help it join in and be part of a cohesive part of this whole project. But I still was having trouble with making it feel cohesive after I let it dry. So what I ended up doing was mixing up a little cup full of Clam Bake Beige, which is also from the Nantucket Pearls collection, and that is just a regular magical. So this will have the glimmer and the pearl to it as well, but because I am on the raw canvas, you're not going to see it. But I do love this color. So I mixed up a whole bunch of it. I added a whole bunch of it here and there, and I did wet down my, where I wanted to spread underneath and stuff. I did get it a little bit more wet by spraying it again with the Ranger Mini Misters. And then I'm just adding the color in. I did let it dry, then I added another layer. I did let it dry, and then I added another layer. I even used my heat tool to dry it at one point, and I got to the point where all I was trying to do was add layer upon layer and give it kind of an old paper water staining kind of look to it. And by making sure that I used up the entire cup worth of paint that I mixed up, that allowed me to create that effect. Now, while I know that has to dry, I'm going to mix up my next chemical experiment, my next Chemtech experiment, and that is using Tweedledee Denim Flat Magical from the Mad Hatter collection with the embossing paste. And I'm mixing this ahead of time because I want it to be a homogeneous mixture, and I do want it to be nice and smooth by the time that I use it. So I'm mixing it ahead of time, and I'm going to just let it sit. And once again, I'm going to use a brush when I'm mixing it because I want to get all the powders off the edge. I want to break up all of the paste that's in there, and I want it to be a nice, smooth consistency by the time that I get to using it. And then I'm just going to set it aside and let it do its thing. In the meantime, while that's just sitting to the side, I'm going to use up the rest of the clam bake beige that I had started with, and I'm just going to add layer upon layer upon layer. And because it is the raw canvas, it's sucking it right up and it's making it nice and smooth, and I got to the point where I didn't want that anymore. I wanted it to be splotchy. I wanted it to be spattery. So I used the paintbrush with the stuff with the heat gun so that it wouldn't have time to absorb in. It wouldn't allow it to absorb too much. It would dry quite quickly closer to the surface, and it wouldn't allow it to go too far. I'm going to do some spattering as well, and I'm going to just get an overall image of inconsistency in color. At this point, I'm looking at this going, this is kind of a dreamy kind of project, and so that's the direction that I took. Sometimes I start out with an image or an impression of where I want to go, and then it takes me another direction. And more often than not, I follow that direction because I know that I'm not done with a project until I like it. And it's only me who has to like it. It's only me who has to love it. If someone else loves it, oh, that's just fabulous. But I'm not done with something until I love it, and I think that gives me a lot of contentment in my creating. So once again, I'm using the heat gun in combination with adding the watermarks so that they do stay as watermarks and they don't spread too much. That one down in the corner, you can see that it already disturbed the blue because it was wet medium over wet medium, and it's moving the blue in order for the beige to come in. Once everything is nice and dry, I'm grabbing my Jamie Doherty Free Spirit stencil. This is a 12 by 12 stencil. It is quite large. It's perfect for this album cover. And the craftshack.com does carry Jamie Doherty's stencils, and it does carry her stamps and everything. This process was a two-stage process. The first thing that I'm trying to do is, because it's such a fine line stencil, is I'm trying to get the color in. I'm not worrying too much about the texture through the first walkthrough. I'm worrying more about getting the paint color in. And because I'm using a makeup sponge, what's happened is the embossing paste has absorbed into the makeup sponge, so as I'm squeezing the blue out of it to get the paint layer in, I'm getting the texture layer coming out of the sponge as a separate entity. It's blue now, but it's a separate entity. And it's a lighter blue because it's of the embossing paste being a white paste. So first intention is to get the blue throughout the stencil. Second intention is to get the texture throughout the stencil. So in order to do that, I've gone from squishing the color into the lines of the stencil for the color to just running the makeup sponge across in order to, in a really loose fashion, in order to get the texture into there. And as you can see, first I do the color, and then I'm going to add the texture. And I do that for the whole stencil. It's not until the end that I go through every part of this stencil and make sure that it's got dimension to it. And that means using the side of the sponge where the embossing paste has pushed out of the sponge, using every angle that I can to get as much in as possible so that nothing is wasted. Once I'm done getting everything through this sponge, I will throw that stencil into one of my journal books. So I'm really not going to waste anything of this mixture that I created. And I just love this so much, I wanted it to be in my journal as well. The reason that I chose blue is because I wanted a color that would fit in with my whole page, but I didn't want black. I will add black with stamping a little bit later, but I didn't want to I wanted this to stay kind of as a dreamy effect. So the minute that you start adding a lot of black into a dream texture, you take away the dream by making it a more forceful image, by making things stronger. And so continuing on with the kind of nature and symbols and dream state, I'm going to add a lot of different kinds of things here. I'm going to add these kind of Aztec-y diamond kind of things along the edges. And as I'm doing this, I'm realizing that that's pulling your face away from the fine line of the stencil to the outside of the border. So I'm going to have to do something to fix that later. What you just saw there was a huge oops. I took my pipette, and spattered, because I wanted the ink spatters, the textured ink spatters in there. And then because it's a binder, it's a slanted thing. It's a 2-inch binder, so of course it's all slanted and it went for a ride. But I fixed that, and then I thought I was going to use my heat tool in order to create edges to contain everything, and then I thought, no, wait, I want these spatters to be more spattery. So I once again took my pipette and went through it, sucked the moisture out of the center of this spatter mark, and spread it around the outside of the spatter mark. This stamp that I'm inking is called En Français, and it is a very large it's a very large background stamp, and I love these huge background stamps, and the reason for that is because I have a tendency to overdo things. I know a lot of you are saying, what? No, really? And so I find with these large background stamps that by the time I get all the ink off of the background stamp, I'm done with that stamp. There's enough of that stamp on my piece that I don't need to do anything else. So that is the wonder of these large background stamps for me. This one is from Stampin' Up, but I do have a lot of them from different companies. If you were wondering, yes, I did let all of those spatters and everything dry overnight. I did not use my heat tool to dry them. I just let it dry overnight because I didn't want them to pucker and bubble inappropriately. I decided that I wanted to color her face in so that she had a nice pink, skin tone kind of face. So what I'm doing here is I'm adding in just a layer of white gesso. And by the time that I'm done, it's going to be about 4 layers of white gesso. And the reason for that is, once again, I'm using this raw canvas and it's absorbed all that beautiful blue pigment into it. And as I add another wet medium, it's going to pull that blue pigment up through the wet medium. And there's nothing that I can do to stop that from happening. I could probably race with my heat gun to dry it really quick, but it's still going to have some of that blue pigment coming through. And every time I add more wet medium to it, it's going to pull that blue up again and again and again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to do it just with my gesso, and I'm going in really, really nice and close to all of my blue lines, because the first layer that I put on is kind of like my outline layer. When you're coloring and you do the outside of an object and then you bring all the color in from the outside of the edges, it makes it so that you never have to worry about going out of the edges of your line work again, because you've already got your color close to the line. You don't have to go that close again. So the first layer, I'm going to be really paying attention a lot to detail and going in all the nooks and crannies and making every line smooth. And then the second, third, fourth, and fifth layers of gesso are just going to be to try and combat that blue a little bit. But it's not going to work. The blue is still going to come through. And you'll see it'll dry and it'll suck all that blue right up to the top layer. But I'm going to try. So once this This gesso is dry. I'm going to figure out where else I want to put gesso. And part of the place of, or the thought of creating the dream kind of thought to this process is to make it so that it kind of has her face sticking out of the dream kind of atmosphere. So I'm going to carry that white into her hair, and I'm going to carry that white throughout the rest of the page in order to create this sense of cohesion through the whole thing. Another thing is that the rest of the binder is going to stay white for now. I'll probably change its color later on, but it's going to stay white for now. And so making sure that it blends in with the rest of the album is also important to me. So here I'm highlighting the flowers throughout the stencil. And you can already see that the blue is starting to come up through that face. But I'm going to show you where else I'm adding in this gesso. And I could have used white paint, but I didn't want the sheen that will go along with white acrylic paint. So I'm using gesso so that it stays as a matte kind of, rather than a gloss. And I'm just going around wherever the page got really dark really fast. I'm just going in with some white, and it's going to kind of offset that dark just a little bit. It's going to emphasize the dark spots, but it's also going to offset so that I do have light where I have dark. And if I'd been thinking, I would have been thinking about shadows and light coming from the top right of or the top left of the page, like I usually do. But this wasn't about that. This was about creating a dream. So once again, to keep your eye in the center of the page, I'm putting the white gesso around the edge of the page to kind of both make it so that it works with the rest of the white binder, but also to bring your eye back to the center of the page. The thing about having really heavy lines and heavy dark places throughout your piece, and then having a very fine line stencil in the center, is that you don't get a lot of emphasis on the center image. And that works well with my dream thought, because I don't want a huge emphasis on her face. I do want you to see it, I do want you to see her, but the huge emphasis doesn't need to be on her face and on the fine line. It needs to be on the dream aspect of this piece. And to fit in with that dream aspect, I pulled in this Prima stencil by Finnebair. It's called Doily 2, and that once again is in the thought process of the dream catcher kind of imagery. And I just added in a couple times. And so when I was doing this, I was thinking, oh, this is like her dreams going off all over the place. I should have the dreams that she caught floating off, and I should have the dreams that are just leaving her mind now. I know that that's not traditionally how dream catchers are thought of, but that is how this kind of morphed around me. And I was happy with the design concept of just having 5 in there. What I just used there is a watercolor crayon by Neocolor 2, and I'm just trying to add a little bit of pigment to her face to take away the ghostly whiteness of it. But look, as soon as I have a wet medium in there, look at that blue coming right through. I cannot get rid of that blue. So I tried, using the pigment just on the brush and bringing it in. But because I'm using a wet medium, it is pulling that blue right up, right through. And so I just said, you know what, I'm going to give up here. And I'm going to go and grab my matte medium gel, and I'm going to seal it. Once this is dry, I'm going to seal it. And because it's going to be sealed, I'm not ever going to have to deal with the blue coming through ever again. But as you can see, as you're watching this, you can see the blue there. Look, comes through quite strong. So I give up. I seal it in with my matte gel medium. That is also an acrylic base, but it dries permanent. And it will not allow that blue to come through it again. Once this layer is dry, I won't have to worry about the blue coming through ever again, and I'll be able to do whatever color I want on top of it without having to worry. So once that dries, I am going to put my crayon through again, and I'm going to start my process all over again with adding the color in there. So this color that I'm using is a Neocolor 2 watercolor crayon. And that color is called Salmon, and it's really a nice peachy skin tone. I use it for a lot of my faces. And then for the cheek color, just a little bit, I'm going to use pink. One of the things I really like about the Neocolor 2 watercolor crayons is that they're named as though they are colors. I know that that sounds strange, but some of the products that are on the market right now have such imaginative names and such fun names that when you're looking for just pink, or you're looking for just blue, or you're looking for just light blue, or you're looking for, you know, turquoise, it's nice to just have a color that's called turquoise. It's nice to just have a color called pink. So I really like the Neocolor 2s for that. That's one of the purposes or the reasons that I like them. Just because it's easy to find the colors that I'm looking for. So all I did was I colored it, and then I went through with water and I activated the color. And look, no more blue coming through, and that made me so happy. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to continue adding in and adding in and adding in pigment until I'm happy with it, until it's a nice, even color coverage, and nice and smooth, because it'll still have the texture from the canvas of the piece, because the canvas isn't sealed. So when you seal a canvas, it takes a lot of that texture away. But this is not going to lose its texture. Everything is still going to have a canvas look, feel to it. So when I run my hand over this piece when I'm finished, it's going to still feel like cloth. It's going to still feel like spongy on the spatters, on all the embossing paste. It's all nice and spongy and soft, and I really, really love that about this piece. So in here, what I'm doing is I'm taking the wet brush and I'm running it on the tip of the crayon, and I'm pulling the pigment right from the crayon to put onto the cheek, because I want it nice and even and smooth, and that's where I'm going to go with this. I will be adding in a little bit of pink, and yes, the crayon is called Pink, into her cheek. And then I'm going to be adding some red, some scarlet red into her lips after this. Now, if you remember back to when I was adding the matte gel and the gesso, her lips underneath were a dark, dark blue, and I did not add any matte gel to seal her lips. So when I was putting this on, it was sucking the moisture right out of it, sucking the pigment right out of it to combat the blue underneath. And that was okay, because the pigment level of red is so high that it went smoothly over red. But see how that lip won't tint because of the blue underneath coming through? So no matter what I did, it wouldn't listen. So I actually took the crayon and scribbled like a really heavy, heavy layer in there, just because it would not take the red. And then I activated it with water, and that worked just beautifully. One of the things I really love to do with when I'm coloring and drawing faces is I like to take the color of the lip and pull that into the color of the cheek. And when you do that, you can never really go wrong with matching the makeup of something that you're coloring. And it goes on really dark, of course, because it's a heavy pigmented red, because often your lips are quite a dark red or a heavy color in contrast to a cheek, which you usually want a light color on. So all you do is you take a tiny bit of that red, and then you blend it with whatever color you've used underneath, and that creates a nice smooth layer of color. And the nice thing about these Neocolor 2s is, even if I were to let this totally dry, and a day or two, I noticed, oh, I've got a really hard line there. I really need to fix that hard line. You can take a wet brush, a damp brush, very gently, and smooth out those heavy lines. You don't have to do it all at once. You know, as things dry, if you have a water line, you just go in and you fix that water line and you make that image smooth again. And this is the finished project. See the layering and how foamy and beautiful that is? I just love it. It's just so stunning. Here you have all my layers, the doily, the inking, the magicals, and everything. And like I said, you can get the magicals and most of the stencils at the Kraafters.com in her store. And you can also join her on her G+ community called Kraafters Kommunity with K's. Thank you for joining me.